and anti-submarine instructor, who had made the report from the sonar cabinet. Her Majesty's Submarine Searcher was on a routine oceanographical patrol of the Sumba Trench. At a depth of 400 feet, she was taking a line of soundings along the northeastern extremity of this gigantic underwater canyon. Searcher's normal commanding officer was sick in Fremantle, a victim of pleurisy, so the spare crew CO, Lieutenant Sinclair, Royal Navy, was acting as her present captain during this 21-day patrol. "Investigate from green 60 to red 40, Sinclair ordered. He stood by the chart table, one hand fingering his chin, before turning towards Lieutenant Banks, his surveying officer, who was officer of the watch. "Investigate from green 60 to red 40, Banks repeated. "Aye, aye, sir." He nodded at Bailey, then concentrated on the sonar dials. Vasco Banks had been appointed to Searcher, additional, as surveying officer, in accordance with the new Admiralty policy. Banks, 22 years old, had been selected because he had shown promise on his sub-lieutenant's courses. He was a worker, having a bent for things mechanical. The new sonar was his particular baby, a brainchild from the Admiralty Underwater Weapons Establishment at Portland. This underwater device, affectionately named Ogle, had been especially developed for underwater surveying and could even pinpoint the undulations of the ocean's bed. Vasco Banks was stocky, only 5'3", and his moon-like face was round and puckish, with ears and mouth added as afterthoughts. He had a button nose and brown eyes that laughed above the cheeks upon which the Australian sun had traced its freckles. He kept his fair hair short, and even in khaki shorts and shirt he looked smart and efficient. Because he was always searching the deeps, he was nicknamed Vasco, after the great explorer da Gama. Yet a frown was creasing his forehead as he bent over the imperturbable Bailey in the sonar cabinet. The temperature was over the 100, and this humidity was getting Vasco down. What with prickly heat, the water rationing, and the lack of fresh food in this old boat, he'd be glad when the patrol was over. He looked up at his captain, who was staring across from the chart table. "I can't make it out, sir," Vasco said. "The contact seems firm enough. It's probably basalt, and yet—" He paused a moment to weigh up the reaction of Sinclair, a stern man who brooked no nonsense. "Well," the captain snapped, his grey eyes like granite, "what's worrying you?" Banks swallowed. "Unless the gyro's wandering, sir, the bearing of the contact is changing rapidly." Vasco watched the irritation in Sinclair's eyes. The captain did not suffer fools gladly. For an instant Banks felt his captain's glance upon him. Sinclair was summing up the competence of his new surveying officer. The angular figure turned away. "Check the gyro," Sinclair ordered, nodding at the telegraphsman standing by the after bulkhead telephone. Banks turned round to peer again over Bailey's shoulder at the sonar dial. "I've made an ass of myself," Vasco thought. The submarine was probably altering course rapidly, and he'd missed the order. He glanced at the ship's head. No, that seemed all right. What had he overlooked, then? The captain would think him an incompetent novice. He flushed and crouched over the set to conceal his embarrassment. "HE bearing dead ahead, sir." The report had an immediate effect upon all except Banks, who was experiencing a mixture of astonishment and relief. The other sonar operator was reporting the murmur of possible propeller noises. Events now moved rapidly as Banks watched Sinclair. The lean figure in the open-necked shirt and khaki shorts swung round to face the depth gauges. "Diving stations," Sinclair ordered curtly. The summons to action echoed through the boat, as, with astonishment, the order was passed verbally down its length. There was a moment of amazed silence. Then men came pouring aft, shaken from sleep, as they tumbled to their diving stations. Banks stood by his sonar, watching the faces of the men as they scrambled silently past him. Some wore an expression of amused tolerance, as if this was just one more exercise to keep them alert. Others wore a look of bored indifference, but on some of the younger faces there were traces